Imagine this. You're sitting across from someone who seems perfectly normal. They smile, they speak politely, they even seem kind. But then, suddenly, without warning, they erupt. A violent word, a manipulative gesture, an eerie coldness in their eyes. You walk away thinking, what just happened? Who was that person really? Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, believed that beneath the surface of every individual lies a complex constellation of psychological forces, powerful, invisible archetypes that govern behavior, emotion, and even destiny. While some of these forces lead us toward individuation, the path to wholeness, others, if ignored, become internal saboteurs. And when they possess a person entirely, they can become truly terrifying. In this video, we'll explore 5 of the most dangerous psychological personalities Jung warned us about. These are not types in the modern sense, but rather archetypal constellations, living psychic patterns that, when left unconscious, distort human behavior in frightening and destructive ways. These aren't just people to avoid. They are also parts of ourselves that we must confront, or else they will confront us. Let's begin with perhaps the most infamous of all, the one who has become devoured by their own darkness. There is a figure within the psyche that lurks in silence, feeding on what we reject, deny, or refuse to see in ourselves. Carl Jung called it the shadow. It contains all the parts of ourselves we find shameful, primitive, or socially unacceptable: our rage, jealousy, lust, weakness. The terrifying truth? The more we repress it, the more powerful it becomes. Not less human, but more raw, more instinctual. When a person is possessed by the shadow, they lose the ability to distinguish between self and impulse. They become a walking eruption of their own unconscious. A shadow, possessed individual, does not appear monstrous at first. Often they seem strong, direct, even charismatic. But their behavior betrays a deep split within. They project their denied darkness onto others, judging harshly, blaming constantly, erupting violently. They see enemies everywhere. This personality is reactive, volatile, and destructive, particularly in intimate relationships where emotional masks eventually fall. Their aggression isn't strategic. It's primitive, impulsive, and rooted in fear. You feel unsafe around them, even if you can't quite explain why. What makes the shadow possessed so dangerous is their lack of inner reflection. They live in a world where the enemy is always outside, never within. They see their anger as justified, their manipulation as necessary, their violence as noble. Their sense of identity is defended by denial. These are the people who seem perpetually at war against others, the world, and ultimately themselves. And yet, they believe they are righteous. That is the horror of unconsciousness. To be fully possessed by darkness and call it virtue. In Jungian analysis, the way to confront the shadow is not to destroy it, but to integrate it. But the shadow-possessed person has lost access to this possibility. They fear their own vulnerability so deeply that the idea of introspection is unbearable. They will destroy relationships, careers, even their own health, just to avoid confronting their inner chaos. Jung warned that those who refuse to face their shadow will eventually meet it in the outside world, as fate, as projection, as catastrophe. We all have a shadow, but when it goes unacknowledged for too long, it begins to take over. Think of dictators, cult leaders, violent partners, or abusive parents. People whose inner wounds have metastasized into collective suffering. They are not just dangerous to themselves, they are dangerous to society. The shadow-possessed, are those who no longer realize they are acting from their wound. They believe they are their anger, their fear, their control. And when you believe that, you've lost yourself entirely. To protect yourself from such people is not merely self-preservation, it's a psychological necessity. But Jung also reminds us, the shadow is not evil in itself. It is part of nature, part of life. The goal is not to fear the shadow, but to recognize it, bring it into consciousness, and learn from it. Only then can we avoid becoming one of the terrifying personalities ourselves. Only then can we reclaim what was lost in the darkness. There are people who shine in social settings. They speak eloquently, dress with taste, and seem to possess an almost magnetic charm. But behind the performance lies something deeply unsettling, an inner emptiness, a void carefully concealed behind a mask. Carl Jung called this the persona, the social role we play, the identity we show to the world. While necessary for survival and interaction, the persona becomes dangerous when it is mistaken for the true self. The inflated persona is not just a mask, it's a prison. This personality is often admired, even envied. They are successful, articulate, and appear emotionally intelligent, but everything about them feels rehearsed. Conversations lack depth. Emotions seem curated. They excel in environments where authenticity is not required. Corporate culture, public relations, social media. But in private, they are often disconnected, emotionally flat, or secretly depressed. The deeper the mask, the more terror lies beneath. The fear that if the persona cracks, the real self will be revealed, and with it, all their hidden inadequacies. The inflated persona is seductive precisely because it promises safety. If I can control how I am seen, I can protect myself from rejection. But this illusion becomes toxic when one begins to believe the mask. Jung warned that the more one identifies with the persona, the further they drift from the self. These people struggle to form real intimacy. Their relationships are often superficial, transactional, or strategic. They fear being truly known because they no longer know themselves. Beneath the inflated surface is often a wounded child, a person who, at some point in life, learned that authenticity was dangerous, that love must be earned through performance. So they built a mask so perfect, it now defines them. They are haunted by imposter syndrome, panic attacks, emotional numbness. In Jungian terms, the psyche is out of balance. The persona has usurped the throne of the self. This is not confidence. It is compensation, a brittle identity always on the edge of collapse. These individuals are not always arrogant. Sometimes they appear overly agreeable, always positive, excessively polite. But this too is a mask, a form of emotional camouflage. They suppress anger, sadness, and vulnerability because they believe such emotions would shatter the image they've spent years constructing. Eventually, the repression manifests in neurosis, burnout, or even psychosomatic illness. The soul, Jung said, cannot be silenced forever. It speaks in dreams, in breakdowns, in subtle betrayals of the mask. To encounter an inflated persona is to experience a kind of psychological mirage. Everything looks real, but nothing is alive. Jung urged us to shed the illusion that the persona is who we are. The true self is deeper, richer, and far more complex than any role we play. To heal, we must risk being seen, not the polished mask, but the raw, uncertain, living human beneath it. Only then can we escape the loneliness of performance and begin the real work of becoming whole. They never shout. They rarely threaten. In fact, many seem kind, vulnerable, even fragile. But after a few hours in their presence, you feel exhausted, confused, even hollow. This is not coincidence. It is energetic theft. Carl Jung never used the term psychic vampire, but he understood the pattern. People who, consciously or not, drain the vitality of others to avoid confronting their own emptiness. This is the archetype of the devourer, a soul so fragmented it must feed on the wholeness of others to survive. The psychic vampire is not necessarily evil, but they are deeply unconscious. Their needs are bottomless, their pain unresolved, their inner self undeveloped. They seek relationships not for connection, but for nourishment. They attach quickly, often with flattery or neediness. They appear wounded, and you may feel compassion for them, but over time, their demands escalate. You become responsible for their moods, their decisions, even their sense of identity. This is not love. It is possession. What makes them terrifying is their subtlety. Unlike overt aggressors, the psychic vampire wounds indirectly, through guilt, passive aggression, constant crises, or emotional dependency. You find yourself rearranging your life around their chaos. You begin to lose your own sense of clarity, confidence, and peace. And the most disturbing part? They often do not realize what they're doing. They feel entitled to your energy, and shocked, even betrayed, when you set boundaries. At the core of this archetype is unmet childhood trauma, abandonment, neglect, or emotional invalidation. Because they never developed an inner sense of self-worth, they survive by attaching to stronger personalities. Jung might say they lack a center of gravity in the self. They are a house without a foundation, constantly seeking stability in others. But no amount of attention, affection, or reassurance will ever be enough. You are not filling a cup. You are feeding a void. The only way to escape the psychic vampire is to recognize the pattern, to understand that your empathy is being weaponized against you. Jung believed that such people do not need saving. They need individuation. But that is their journey, not yours. You cannot rescue someone who is committed, consciously or not, to remaining fragmented. Detaching from them is not cruelty. It is clarity. It is the refusal to let your soul be consumed in someone else's unconscious hunger. To meet a psychic vampire is to confront a mirror of your own boundaries. Do you give too much? Do you confuse love with rescue? Do you silence your needs for the comfort of others? Jung's work reminds us, to be whole is to live with open eyes. The devourer will always exist, in others, and sometimes in ourselves. The task is not to destroy it, but to recognize it, and walk away before it swallows you whole. In mythology and psychology, the senex is the archetype of the wise old man, a symbol of maturity, reason, and discipline. But Jung observed that every archetype has a shadow, and the senex is no exception. When distorted, this figure becomes rigid, cold, and authoritarian. The senex complex represents a psyche trapped in order and control, afraid of chaos, spontaneity, and emotion. This personality appears responsible and grounded, but beneath the surface lies deep fear, a fear of life's unpredictability. The senex complex individual worships structure, rules, routines, traditions. These are their sacred totems. They often become successful in hierarchical systems, religion, government, academia, corporations. But they do not adapt, they enforce. They are allergic to change, resistant to new ideas, and hostile to the irrational. To them, emotions are weaknesses, and creativity is dangerous. They often suppress joy, spontaneity, even love, in favor of discipline. In their presence, Others feel judged, stifled, or diminished. This type is often cloaked in a mask of moral superiority. They claim to act from wisdom, but their wisdom lacks soul. They use logic to dominate, not to understand. They appear composed, but their psyche is brittle, easily shattered by anything that challenges their worldview. They may quote scripture, philosophy, or science to justify their rigidity, but their true motivation is fear. Fear of uncertainty, fear of being wrong, fear of letting go. Their control is not strength, it is anxiety in disguise. They are particularly dangerous in positions of power. Their rules become laws, and their fear becomes policy. Entire families, institutions, even societies can be shaped by the shadow of the senex. These are the parents who crush their children's spirit in the name of discipline. The managers who demand obedience over innovation. The spiritual leaders who suppress questioning. The world becomes a machine, and everyone is expected to play their part, without error, without rebellion, without soul. In Jungian psychology, the antidote to the senex complex is the archetype of the puer aeternus, the eternal youth, the one who brings life, imagination, and renewal. But the senex hates the puer because the puer threatens his control. To heal this complex, one must rediscover play, laughter, and vulnerability. It means stepping out of the fortress of logic and embracing the flow of life. It means realizing that wisdom is not the absence of emotion, but the integration of it. To encounter someone trapped in the senex complex is to feel as if you're not allowed to be. They do not listen. They instruct. They do not ask. They declare. Their presence suffocates the psyche, and yet, beneath their iron mask is often a person terrified of chaos, longing for softness, but unable to admit it. Jung reminds us that true wisdom is flexible, humble, and open to the unknown. The tyrant senex must be dissolved for the sage to emerge. He is charming, imaginative, and full of possibility. Life is an adventure, the world a playground. This is the puer aeternus, the eternal youth, a figure of hope, vitality, and dream. But when distorted, this archetype becomes a danger to self and others. Jung warned that the puer, when unbalanced, refuses to grow up. He avoids responsibility, commitment, and depth. He lives in fantasy, flits from one idea to another, and shuns anything that requires sacrifice. Beneath the youthful glow lies an arrested soul. The puer aeternus avoids the pain of becoming. He fears limits, routine, and time itself. He may be a visionary, an artist, or an intellectual, always pursuing ideals, never grounding them. Relationships with the puer are intoxicating at first, spontaneous, romantic, full of magic. But soon, a pattern emerges. He cannot commit. He flees when things get real. He makes promises he cannot keep. His charm becomes a trap, his freedom a prison. He is allergic to reality, and yet reality always returns. This personality often carries a deep mother complex, a longing to be cared for, understood, and shielded from life's demands. He may attract partners who play the maternal role, nurturing his fragility while sacrificing their own needs. Over time, resentment builds. The puer feels smothered, while the partner feels abandoned. The result is emotional chaos. The puer doesn't intend to harm, but he leaves wreckage nonetheless. Lovers confused, friends exhausted, dreams unfulfilled. The tragedy of the puer aeternus is that he confuses freedom with avoidance. He sees responsibility as imprisonment, but fails to see that without roots, nothing can grow. He wants transcendence without descent, flight without gravity. Jung saw this figure in myth as Icarus, the boy who flew too close to the sun only to fall. The poor resists incarnation, the hard work of building a real life, and so he floats, brilliant, creative, lonely, unfinished. But within the poor lies immense potential. If he chooses to descend, to suffer, to commit, to mature, he becomes a carrier of renewal, the hero who brings vision into reality. This requires sacrifice, the death of illusion, the courage to stay, the willingness to endure boredom, failure, and pain. It is only then that the poor ceases to be a boy and becomes a man, not in age, but in soul. The journey from poor to integrated adult is one of the most sacred paths in Jungian thought. To encounter a puer aeternus is to feel enchanted and unsettled. They promise everything but deliver little. They love possibilities more than people. And yet, we must not only beware of them, we must also look within. For the poor lives in us too, in every dream we fear to realize, in every responsibility we flee. Jung teaches us that to grow is to descend into life, into limits, into the earth. Only there can the eternal child finally be born into something whole. Each of these terrifying personalities, the shadow possessed, the inflated persona, the anima animus possessed, the tyrant synex, and the lost poor, are not just other people. They are parts of us. They dwell within our unconscious, shaping our thoughts, our fears, our relationships. Carl Jung did not map these psychic patterns to judge others, but to illuminate the inner landscape of the soul. His goal was never to exile the darkness, but to bring it into the light of consciousness, where healing begins. To recognize these personalities in others is an act of awareness. To recognize them in ourselves is an act of courage. Most people spend their lives projecting their inner world onto others, blaming, idolizing, fearing, without ever realizing that the true battlefield is within. Jung's psychology is not just theory, it is a mirror. And when we dare to look deeply, without flinching, we discover that the demons we flee are often fragments of our own disowned self. Individuation, the path to wholeness, requires confrontation. We must name the shadow, strip the persona, withdraw the projections of the anima and animus, soften the rigid senex, ground the flight of the poor. This is not a comfortable path. It is a descent, often painful, always humbling, but it is also liberating. For in facing what is terrifying, we reclaim what is essential. Our wholeness does not lie in perfection, but in integration, in becoming conscious of all that we are. In a world obsessed with appearances, speed, and certainty, Jung invites us inward, into the murky depths of the psyche, where real transformation begins. The terrifying personalities are not simply threats to avoid. They are also invitations, calls from the unconscious to wake up, to grow, to evolve. To ignore them is to remain unconscious. To confront them is to begin the slow, sacred work of becoming human. So, the next time you meet someone who unsettles you, who radiates darkness, charm, intensity, rigidity, or escape, ask not only, what is wrong with them, but also, what is being shown to me? The external world reflects the inner world, and perhaps the greatest danger is not out there, but in what we refuse to see within.